everybody. My name is Penny. I am an alcoholic. I feel like the very first thing that I need to do is qualify myself. Oh, I'm hearing myself twice. But I feel like I need to qualify myself as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got sober on December 3rd of 2018. That was my second go round. My first go round was September 18th, 1993. I was sober for approximately 25 years and I relapsed. And I found myself back in the rooms on December 3rd of 2018. What qualifies me as an alcoholic is that when I pick up a drink, I cannot stop. I cannot tell you with any certainty how much I'm going to drink or how long it's going to last. And I cannot tell you with any certainty what the consequences are going to be. And when I try to stop drinking on my own without a power greater than myself, I cannot stay stopped. And for me, that is what qualifies me as an alcoholic. I'm more than a member of the fellowship of the program. I believe that the program has, the fellowship aspect of it, which is incredibly important. But then the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, as has been taught to me by my sponsor, is the doctor's opinion in the first 164 pages of the big book. So as I'm sharing on step 5 tonight, I'm really going to be drawing a lot from the big book because that's what I was taught. And I believe that if I want to remain sober, and that I have to follow the instructions as they are written in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, because that's our textbook. I say textbook because I don't believe that it's a novel. It is absolutely a textbook to be studied. So with that, I'll just kind of jump in. I don't think that I can really talk about step 5 without talking about step 4. If step 4 is not understood, then step 5 is not going to be profitable. And so, step 4 is based on that step 3 decision, right? That decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand him. However, that decision doesn't mean anything unless I follow it up with action. A decision is just a decision. And without that action, that decision never really becomes a reality. So, for me, I had to confirm my decision with step 3 by doing step 4. It's funny because step 4 on page 64 of the big book, it says that step 4 is a vital and crucial, but it's ineffective unless at once followed by strenuous effort. And so there's always a lot of question about, when should someone do step 4 or, taking the steps slowly. I've heard some people say they take a step a month, some a step a year. I don't prescribe to that at all because the big book does say at once. And it also says that not only are we to do it at once, but we are to do it immediately, right? So, what's the point of step 4 when we're doing that strenuous effort to be rid of those things that are blocking us? And for me, it was what was blocking me from growing that relationship with my higher power. What was blocking me from the sunlight of the spirit? And I had to face and be rid of those things, as it says on page 64 of our book. And so what are those things that block me? Typically it's self, right? And the manifestation of self, resentments, being spiritually sick, being angry. And when I'm taking a look at that 4th step, and I have those columns, I've got the list, right? So I got column 1, everybody that all of my resentments, those I had harmed, that the fear inventory, those things that I'm afraid of, and my sexual inventory, or, my relationship inventory, as I personally like to call it. And so I need to take a look at, in that anger, what's really involved in that? Self-esteem, my security, so my pocketbook, my ambitions, my personal relationships, and my sexual relationships. So I have to really look at those things. And so what is the nature, who am I upset with? Why? I got to bullet that. And then how does it affect me? Is it, any of those things? And if I look at page 65, it repeats that again. And it says, I need to look at my self-esteem, my security, my personal or my sexual relationships, and those fears. And when I have finished that, when I've completed that, I need to consider it carefully. And so I kind of looked up, what does consider mean? And it means to study something or to weigh it out, right? So, and what does carefully mean? Marked by a painstaking effort to avoid errors or omissions. And the big book says that we have to be fearless and thorough, right? And so if I've done this, if I've completed all 4 of those columns, I need to go back and I need to look at it again, just like the big book says. We go back and we consider it carefully. We study it, we weigh it out, and making sure that we have not avoided anything, that we haven't made any errors. So it really needs to be complete. And, I have to take a look at what are resentments? What does that really mean, right? And to translate it directly, a resentment means to feel again, right? But what does the big book say about resentments? On page 66, the big book says that resentments essentially equal a life of futility and unhappiness. So what is futility? I'm a little bit wordy. I'm kind of a word nerd and I like to look words up. I really want to understand what this means. And the word futility means useless, right? So if I have a life that is filled with resentment, I have a life of uselessness and unhappiness. Well, who wants that? So, and the big book goes on to say that for an alcoholic, resentment is infinitely grave. So that's endless death. Okay, well, that's kind of scary, right? And when I read page 66, it talks about the deadliness of resentments. 6 times it mentions that it's grave or deadly, or if I were to live, several times. So in the second to the last paragraph, it says, once we've got all of this, we're prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle, right? So if my problem is self and I have been going through life based on self, then I have looked at every situation in my life from my own perspective. I've never stopped to look at it from someone else's perspective. And that keeps me perpetually in the victim role. And if I'm a victim, I can never take responsibility. And so I have to take responsibility for my life. And step 4 is the beginning of taking that responsibility. So it says that we have to look at it from an entirely different view. What were my wrongdoings, right? Where did I go wrong? And it talks about, I'm actually going to turn over to page 66 here in my big book. So give me just a second. I thought I had it marked, but I guess I didn't. On page 66 says, we turned back to the list where it held the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill. How could we escape? So again, it's talking about how those resentments are so deadly to us. And when I looked at it from that perspective, I realized how important it is for me to really look at things from a new lens and to sit down with my sponsor and just really go through it and be very thorough about it. The big book gives some really good instructions on page 67 for that 4th column. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or frightened? And so when I look at it from that perspective, now I have to go back to those first 3 columns and I have to look at that at each situation and I have to ask myself, where was I selfish? Where was I dishonest? Where was I self-seeking? And where was I frightened? Where was I to blame? So I have to completely separate the person or the situation that I'm having this resentment towards, and I have to ask myself these questions. And these are hard questions. It takes a lot of soul searching, and for for the newcomer that is looking at step 4 and says, oh my gosh, I'm terrified to do step 4. Trust me, while it is a difficult process because we have to put a lot of thought and prayer into it, it's so rewarding. So I always teach my sponsees that doing the 4th step is kind of like cleaning out a closet, right? So I've got all of this stuff, and the ladies on the meeting, I'm sure, will completely relate to this. If I have a closet that is stuffed full of crap that I have just collected over years and years and years, I have to completely empty out that closet. I have to make a bigger mess, really, before I start to clean it up. But I have to take every article out and I have to examine it. And I have to decide, is this a keep? Is this a donate, or is this a throwaway, right? And when I'm doing my inventory, when I'm doing my 4th step, it's kind of like that. I'm pulling everything out of my emotional closet, everything out of my thought closet, and I'm laying it out and I'm taking a look at it and saying, what am I keeping? What am I getting rid of? So, our 4th column really shows us where our thinking is false. It shows us where we have, or at least for me, it showed me where I had this victim mentality. And as long as I was a victim, I was never going to get beyond any of those things. And one of the big questions that I have received from the women that I sponsor, and that I actually had for my sponsor in the 4th column, was about things that happened to me when I was a kid, when I was growing up, that happened by adults that were in my life. And I said, I don't see where I have any wrongdoing in that. What do I put in my 4th column? And my sponsor, being a very wise woman, said to me that I had zero responsibility for the things that happened to me when I was a child. And I say that to my sponsees: you have zero responsibility for the things that happen to you when you're a child. However, I do have 100% responsibility for holding on to that resentment. Because every time I would think about that situation and I was resentful about it, I was giving them the power to victimize me over and over and over again. And so all I was doing was harming myself and keeping myself in that victim role. And so once I kind of had that epiphany and I took responsibility for how I was responding to those things that happened to me and putting myself in the victim role, it really changed a lot for me. And it opened my eyes to the idea that not only can I live differently outside of that, it doesn't define me anymore. And I could let go of a lot of those things. So that was a really important part of my 4th step in doing that 4th column. It really kind of turned everything else in the 2nd or the 3rd and the 2nd column into a lie. And it gave me the ability to see the truth. So I just kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit on, how do we do a step 4 and what does that look like? And what are the benefits of doing that step 4? And honestly, for me, doing that 4th step was about seeing the truth. It was finding the truth about myself, finding the truth about these situations, and removing myself from the role of victim and taking responsibility for those situations that largely I created. Outside of the things that happened to me when I was a kid, the resentment that I held on to as a result of those things created all of these other situations that I brought into my adulthood. And so I found that the problems that I had really were of my own making. And once I recognized that they were of my own making, then I was able to go back and look at things in a different perspective so that I could sit down with my sponsor and I could have that long talk, right? So, what is the purpose of the 5th step? Why do we do it? Page 55 of the 12 and 12 is really clear on that. Page 55 says, all of AA's 12 steps ask us to go contrary to our natural desires. They all deflate our egos. Okay, so number 1, I need to deflate my ego. I don't know if anybody can relate, but I personally have a pretty big ego. And when it comes to ego deflation, a few steps are harder to take than 5. but scarcely any step is more necessary to long-term sobriety and peace of mind than this one. So there's a couple of really good reasons right there in the first paragraph of the 12 and 12. I need to deflate my ego. And if I want long-term sobriety and peace of mind, this fifth step is really important. And then it goes on to say in the second paragraph that AA's experience has taught us we cannot live alone with our pressing problems and the character defects which cause or aggravate them. So essentially what that tells me, or what that told me when I was going through it, was that I'm living alone in my head, right? I've created all of these narratives and all of these stories in my head surrounding all of these situations that I have all these feelings about, that I'm angry about, or that I'm still hurt about, or things that I'm holding on to. I have created these narratives. And if I've done a thorough step 4 and I look at that last column, I can see what those narratives are that I've made up in my head. And it says, if we have come to know how wrong thinking and action have hurt us and others, then the need to quit living by ourselves with those tormenting ghosts of yesterday gets more urgent than ever. We have to talk to somebody about them. And I know that some people say there are no musts in AA, but I think that the big book and the 12 and 12 is pretty clear. You know, it says we have to talk to someone about them. That's a pretty clear must, right? You know, when I look at the big book, it says that a solitary self-appraisal is not sufficient. So if I'm trying to do this by myself, you know, and I think, oh, I can skip this whole talking to somebody about it thing, and this is just going to be between me and God, well, then I'm stuck with my own twisted thinking, right? Because I've already figured out in that fourth column that my thinking is not really rooted in reality most of the time, if it's rooted in self. So I really need to have that other person there, my sponsor, typically, that's going to give me that objective perspective on what I'm looking at and what I'm talking about, so that I can begin to see things more clearly, and I can right size my ego. So I can begin to have a little bit of humility. For me, when I first came in, humility meant being humiliated. And I didn't really understand the difference between humility and humiliated. And so when I started to understand that humility is simply having a right or balanced view of who and what I am versus humiliation, which is, you know, devastating, then I began to actually want to have humility. I wanted to have that balanced view. I'm not better than anyone. I'm not worse than anyone, but I definitely have some things that I need to work on and that I need to let God remove from me through working these steps. So in that way, humility became something that I desired rather than something that I was kind of afraid of. It really helped me to see what the true meaning of humility is. So another why, it says if we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. It goes on to talk about how, you know, so many people had tried to skip this step and almost invariably they drank again. And for us to drink is to die. So again, we have sort of that ominous warning. We have to do this fourth step. We have to do this fifth step because this disease's whole job is to kill us. You know, and it may not kill me physically right away, but it's definitely going to kill my pocketbook. It's going to kill my spirit. It's going to kill my relationships. It's going to kill my career. It's going to kill everything about me before it takes me physically. So, you know, vital means life-giving, right? You have to have, the word vital is, it really is just means about life, right? So, if the big book tells me that if I skip this vital step, it's telling me that I'm skipping a life-giving step. And is that life-giving physically? Yes, but it's also life-giving in the sense of having that peace of mind, being able to look the world in the eye, being able to work with side by side with people in the program, people outside of the program, and to become a positive part of the stream of life. So that's the vitality that comes from doing this fifth step. So super important if I want to have a full life. And so, who do we do this step with, right? So for me, it was my sponsor. For others, it may not be, maybe they don't have a sponsor or their sponsor isn't available. The book tells us to find that person that is trustworthy, to find that person that we know we can do this step with. It does tell us that probably not the best to do this with our spouse or our significant other, especially because it's probably going to harm them. There's probably going to be things that we need to talk about that they may not want to hear, that may be harmful for them to hear. And the other thing too is that if I were to do that step with my significant other, I may not be completely honest. For fear of losing that relationship or harming that relationship. So I have to make sure that this step is done with someone that is trustworthy, that I can be completely open and honest with. On page 73 of the big book, it talks about more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life, right? So part of the fifth step is for me to become that singular person rather than being one person in front of everybody else and another person completely in my head. So more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He is very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents his stage character. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. So in other words, I'm a phony. Unless and until I do this fifth step and really become one with myself, I cannot be one with humanity. And I can't be real. And then it says, the inconsistency is made worse by the things he does on his sprees. Coming to his senses, he is revolted at certain episodes he vaguely remembers. These memories are a nightmare. He trembles to think someone might have observed him. As fast as he can, he pushes these memories far inside himself. He hopes they will never see the light of day. He is under constant fear and tension. That makes for more drinking. So again, it's going back to keeping those secrets, keeping those things that I feel ashamed about or that I'm fearful that anyone else is going to know in the dark. And there's that saying, we're only as sick as our secrets, and it's our secrets that keep us sick. It wasn't until I shared all of myself, all of those things with another human being that I felt kind of free. For me, doing that fifth step was very freeing to sit across from someone who was accepting and loving and non-judgmental and who understood where I was coming from, who said to me, yes, I've done that too, and then shared some of her things with me, or said, I understand exactly how you feel. That was huge for me because for the first time, I wasn't alone. For the first time, I felt understood. I didn't feel that separateness from the world that I felt prior to doing the fifth step. And I didn't feel so fearful of being who I really am. So that was really important for me. And I have a sponsor who is just absolutely amazing and loving and nurturing. And so it was really helpful. And God picked out exactly the right person that I needed. The big book goes on to talk about our, I'm sorry, my dogs are going nuts, when we have worked with psychologists, that we've seldom been honest, that it's our unwillingness to be honest with these sympathetic men. And we had been honest with no one else. And then there's a must at the bottom of page 73. We must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long and happily in this world. So again, I got to go back to, what is the big book telling me? Well, if I want to live long and happily in the world, then I've got to be honest with another person. So, that fourth step in getting it down on paper was the first time I had ever been truly just gut level honest. But then I had to take it that step further. I had to go and do that action immediately following, and I needed to be completely honest with another person. And for me, that was the beginning of really seeing God beginning to work in my life. I had seen glimpses of it prior to that, but it just kind of seemed like my program took off after doing the fifth step and working with my sponsor on it. She was amazing. And, no wonder, I mean, she did it right out of the big book, right? So for the first time, I didn't have to live that double life. I didn't have to be dishonest. Living that double life made me a dishonest person. Putting that sort of mask on and that face on for the whole world to see, knowing inside that I wasn't the person that I was projecting. For the first time after the fifth step, I no longer had to do that. And I felt comfortable in my skin. That was incredibly important. And it really was the basis for a tremendous amount of freedom from that bondage of self. So some of the promises from doing the fifth step on page 57 of the 12 and 12. I love the 12 and 12. I'm actually currently doing a 12 and 12 study with just a little group of my girlfriends right now. And I just love this book because it just breaks things down so well. But on the top of page 57, it says, "It seems plain that the grace of God will not enter to expel our destructive obsessions until we are willing to try this." So, there's another promise in there. I always love to look for the promises in the big book and in the 12 and 12. And there's the promise that the obsession is going to be, that destructive obsession is going to be dispelled if I'm willing to try doing the fifth step. It says, "We shall get rid of the terrible sense of isolation we've always had." I don't know about you, but if you're my kind of alcoholic, I felt different from the whole world from as far back as I can remember. And after doing the fifth step, that isolation did seem to melt away. It says that nearly all of us suffered that feeling that we didn't quite belong. But after doing the fifth step, that tends to change. At least it did for me. When we reached AA and for the first time in our lives stood among people who seemed to understand, the sense of belonging was tremendously exciting. We thought the isolation problem had been solved, but soon we discovered that while we weren't alone anymore in a social sense, we still suffered many of the old pangs of anxious apartness. And again, this is, those things that happened to me before I did my fifth step. And it's crazy to me that when I read these things in the 12 and 12 and the big book, like every question that I had for my sponsor about doing these steps, I would ask her a question and she would say, "Read on." And the answer would be like in the next sentence or the next paragraph. It was crazy. And that was exactly my experience, just looking at this text and studying it and going, "Oh, wow, okay. Now I know what I need to do." What I also found is that for me, the fifth step wasn't about it being a confessional. The fifth step was about taking a look at those character defects that were identified in the fourth column of my fourth step and recognizing those things that I needed to be rid of, right? So it really was setting me up for the sixth step and the seventh step and then 8 and 9. So it helped me to see how all of these steps are in order for a reason, and how the fifth step was built on the fourth step, how the sixth and the seventh step are built on the fifth step. And then how the rest of my program is built on this foundation, really, of doing 1 through 5. And having that strong foundation so that I could move forward and do those steps that were coming up. So I don't really want to get ahead of myself too much on 6, 7, but it really is for me, it was a fact-finding mission. And it was really important for me to do that in order for me to stay sober. And so, you know, page 75 seems a little bit daunting when it says that we pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. You know, at first I thought this meant that I had to write my life story. And I had to tell my life story. And really, my sponsor was great and was like, no, we're just going to go through your fourth step. We're going to look at these columns. We're going to identify things. And what you're going to see is a pattern. And we're going to identify these character defects. And then, you know, you'll be on your way to working with God so that God can remove those defects of character. But you can't ask God to remove something that you don't know is there. So it became very much a fact-finding mission for me. The withholding nothing part was really scary for me. I had some things that I had to talk about that I swore I was going to take to my grave, that no one was ever going to know about me, because I had this thought in my head that if she knew about me all of the things that I know about me, she will feel about me the way that I feel about myself. So it was kind of daunting. And my sponsor was great about prayer and meditation and just really preparing myself to go and take this step. And we didn't waste time at all. It was very quick. As soon as I took my third step, we did the fourth and fifth within just a couple of weeks. She kept me on a timeline. I needed to have that timeline. Otherwise I would have procrastinated and never done it. But I had to take that leap of faith. I had to be reminded that I made a commitment that I was willing to go to any length in order to stay sober. And that meant that I had to trust somebody. And for me, it was my sponsor. She is incredible. She was very trustworthy. And I knew I had to take that leap of faith if I really wanted to stay sober. So that's what I did. I told her everything. And there's some promises on page 75 that it talks about once we do our fifth step. And I can honestly say that every single one of these came true for me. On page 75, it says, once we have taken this step withholding nothing, we are delighted. I don't know that I felt delighted. I felt exhausted, but I felt relieved that I had finally kind of unloaded all of this stuff. We can look the world in the eye. That was important. Prior to taking my fifth step, I don't think that I was able to look the world in the eye. I think I always looked down. Whenever I was having a conversation with someone, I would look down or I would look away. And I didn't even recognize that as just this horrible shame that I felt. Once I did my fifth step, I noticed that I was able to look people in the eye. And the reason that I know that happened is because for the first time, I noticed that my sponsor has green eyes. I didn't know that until after I did my fifth step. And I was like, wow, I just saw the color of her eyes for the first time. So I was able to look someone in the eye, and I was able to look myself in the eye too. And that was huge for me. I was able to look in the mirror and not feel this overwhelming shame and all of the things that I would say to myself when I would look in the mirror. And you know what I'm talking about, all the things that we tell ourselves, that wasn't there anymore. At least if it wasn't nearly as loud, and I could tamp it down quite a bit. And we were able to be alone at perfect peace and ease. And so for me, what that meant was those narratives that I had created in my head about all of these situations and all of these things that I was angry about or upset about, I was no longer having arguments with people in my head. I prior to the fifth step, I would have all kinds of arguments with people in my head. Now, I won all those arguments, but I was no longer having arguments with people inside my head by myself. Fears fall from us. we begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. That was very, very true for me. The fear of other people and what they thought of me seemed to fall away. And my relationship with my higher power really became much stronger. And I felt the presence of my Creator in a whole new way. One of the things that happened that was really crazy was that I remember after I did my fifth step, I was driving to work and I looked out the window of my car and everything seemed brighter. It was in the fall and I noticed that the leaves on the trees just seemed to be a brighter color of red, and the grass seemed to be a brighter color of green. Everything just seemed like it was so much more sharply in focus. And I realized that it was because the blinders had been lifted. All of the blinders of shame and regret and guilt seemed to have been lifted. And there was this huge sense of relief and the sense of being a part of things that I had never felt I was a part of before. Some of the other promises, the feeling that the drink problem had disappeared. That is absolutely true. I did not have any desire whatsoever to drink. There are thoughts sometimes that come to mind, but they're very fleeting today. One of the 9-step promises, or no, not the 9-step, in the 10-step promises, it talks about if we're tempted, we'll recoil as from a hot flame. Absolutely true. I have absolutely zero desire to drink. And then it gives us some, another promise. We will feel we are on the broad highway walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. For sure, definitely feeling like I was now a part of something much bigger than myself, and that I was a part of the stream of life, not just in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, but in my home, in my workplace, in my community, among other people. I just really felt like I was finally a part of. And then it talks about some instructions that we are to, go home and find a quiet place and sit for an hour. My experience with the 5th step was I have a Harley. I love to ride. And I thought it would be a good idea to go for a ride on my Harley after my 5th step to kind of clear my head a little bit. For me, that was not a good idea because I think I was so amped up from doing my 5th step. I wasn't paying real close attention and I crashed my Harley. Thankfully, I didn't get hurt. So my recommendation to anyone that rides a motorcycle, don't take a ride after your 5th step. Don't ride your motorcycle over to your sponsor's house, go in a car. Anyway, after I got home, after crashing my bike, I did take my book down and I sat for an hour and I really thought about my 5th step, my 4th step, and my 5th step. Was I thorough? Did I miss anything? Did I forget anything? Is there anything else that I need to talk about? I prayed about that, and thankfully, I had been pretty thorough and nothing really came to mind. And then I took my book down and I did what the book says and I read. I went over the first 5 steps and I had to ask myself the questions, have I been thorough? Have I been honest? Is there anything that I left out? Do I feel as though I know God better? Yes, absolutely. And I said that prayer, thanking God that I know him better. And I love the last paragraph on page 75. It says, returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know him better. Taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reviewing the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything. So have I been thorough and honest? For we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? So alluding to step 2. Have we skimped on the cement put on into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? So steps 1 through 3. And I actually put a note in my big book after I did my fifth step. It says, I know God better because I know the truth about myself, and God is truth. Um, and that was just, that was a huge awakening for me um, to feel that nearness of God, this God that when I first came into the rooms in 2018, I thought was really, really mad at me, and that I was really mad at, that I had really no relationship with outside of a contentious one. And to see that relationship through doing those first 5 steps really change and grow and become what it is, what it was then, and to grow into what it is today. All because, I did a little bit of praying and I had a little bit of willingness. Um, my sponsor was, are you willing to be willing? And I said, yes, I'm willing to be willing. And she said, okay, let's get to work. Um, so, for me, the fifth step was a huge turning point in my recovery. And I can say today that I am a recovered alcoholic. I have been relieved of that horrible state of mind and body, that hopeless state of mind and body. I am a recovered alcoholic today. I'm not cured of alcoholism by any stretch of the imagination. I will always be an alcoholic. I will always have the allergy of the body. But I don't have the obsession of the mind today. And I don't have the spiritual malady today. And step 5 was that turning point. I will say that after I did step 5, 6, and 7, I, for whatever reason, decided that I was going to just coast. I don't think it was a conscious decision, but it was definitely something that I did. I think I got to this point where I had done so much work that I was like, whew, glad that's over with. I don't have to do that. I can just kind of rest for a little while. And honestly, it's a cautionary tale because at 6 months sober, I was miserable. I hated the world. I was angry all over again. And it felt like all of the work that I had done was undone. And I called my sponsor. I went over to her house and I said, look, if this is what sobriety is like, I don't want it. I'm ready to go back out and drink again. And she was like, whoa, 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 what's going on? You were doing so well. And honestly, I'd been kind of coasting and not doing any more work after that. And I just kind of felt, I felt all of these things, but I was going into the meetings and I wasn't sharing. I wasn't being honest. I was putting on the face again. And so, she asked me a series of questions. Are you going to meetings? Yes. Are you sharing honestly in meetings? No. Are you praying on a regular basis, daily? No. How often are you praying? I'm like, sometimes. When you're praying, are you on your knees praying? No. And so I had to, kind of go through that series of questions. Are you reading the big book? Are you studying the text? No. And she's like, well, no wonder you're miserable. And it really kind of hit home how important it is for me to continue to do this work on a daily basis. I think Mark Houston puts it best when he says, how free do you want to be? And that was something that my sponsor asked me that day. She said, how free do you want to be? Do you want freedom enough to continue to do the work? And I was like, oh, okay, so I have to keep doing this. All right, all right, I'll do this. So I got back on track, got back on the beam, and started doing all of the work and having those spiritual experiences again on a daily basis, getting that spiritual food that's so important. Mark Houston, again, I love quoting him, says, I cannot live today on the spiritual food that I ate yesterday. I have to have that spiritual food every day and connect with my creator every day. And so today I do that. It's because I had that foundation of steps 1 through 5. And a really great sponsor that helps me get through the rest of my steps. And now today I get to live in 10, 11, and 12, and I have a life beyond my wildest imagination. Not perfect, definitely has problems and challenges, but I don't have to drink over them today, and I can have a great relationship with my higher power, and I can be of service to God and to my fellow man. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful. So thank you guys so much for letting me come and share tonight. This has been an honor and a privilege, and it was really great to meet everybody, even those across the pond. I'm excited about that too. So thanks, guys.